My name is Dana Whitmore. I'm 56 years old, and for the past 20 years, I was the backbone of Westbridge Financial Group's client growth division in Charlotte, North Carolina. At 7:46 a.m. on a Tuesday, I walked into a conference room expecting to discuss new policy rollouts. Instead, I found Patrice from HR and our general counsel waiting in silence. No handshake, just a manila folder and a sentence that still echoes. Your position is being eliminated. You can take this entry-level role or leave. They stared at the wall behind me like I was already gone. 20 years of service, of missed birthdays, of taking client calls from hospital waiting rooms and snowed-in airports. Gone in 15 minutes. Can I have until tomorrow? I whispered, thinking about the mortgage, my daughter's tuition, and my mother's assisted living fees. Later that evening, a former coworker messaged me, "Heard what happened. FYI, your role wasn't eliminated. The CEO's nephew starts Monday." Just like that, the betrayal had a name. But before I tell you how I flipped this insult into the most satisfying professional win of my career, I want to say this. This isn't just another story of corporate politics. This is a reminder. If you've ever been discarded, underestimated, or replaced by someone who's never paid dues, you're not alone. Keep listening. If this story resonates, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Real people, real revenge, real rebirth. Now back to the story. Professionally, I was known as the fixer. I could calm any client storm. Not with charm, but with clarity and commitment. My success came not from smooth talk, but from obsessing over results, even if it meant working Christmas Eve. My personal life, simple. A cozy house by Lake Norman, a stubborn rescue dog named Max, and shelves full of chipped teacups. I never married. Not because I couldn't, but because I never found someone worth surrendering my drive for. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. Meeting invites that never hit my inbox. Strategy calls shifted to golf courses I wasn't invited to. Important memos bypassed me even when I originated the client contacts. But when you've given your identity to a company for 2 decades, denial can be comforting. That morning, I showed up at 7 a.m., same as always. I prepped quarterly forecasts, ready to lead a pitch. My calendar read 10:30, HR check-in. I assumed it was about the company's health plan changes. Instead, they offered me an assistant role, a 62% pay cut. Patrice said, "This has nothing to do with performance. It's just restructuring." Like that made it noble. I responded steady. Restructuring usually includes severance. Transition plans? Notice. General counsel replied coldly. "This is the transition plan. We're offering continued employment." We didn't have to. I could have snapped. Instead, I asked for 24 hours and walked out with my spine straight. Back at my desk, eyes avoided mine. My computer access was already limited. I couldn't open client accounts, the ones I had built. 2 decades of knowledge wiped like a whiteboard. I packed a few keepsakes, a potted fern from my first year, a handwritten card from a CEO whose business I saved during the 2008 crash. My nameplate. In the car, I finally broke. No tears, just pressure. A weight of injustice. Then clarity. I pulled out my phone and called Glenn Price, CFO of one of our biggest clients, a $14 million account I had personally nurtured. He answered. "Dana, everything all right with the review deck?" I paused. "Glenn, they eliminated my position this morning." Silence. Then, "Where are you?" "In the parking lot." "Don't move. I'm 15 minutes away." And just like that, the power shifted. What came next? Let's just say they fired the wrong person. And I didn't get mad. I got strategic. Instead of breaking, I found clarity. I unlocked my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd never used outside of quarterly reviews, Glenn Price, CFO at Carolina Ridge Partners. It was a $14 million account I had grown over 15 years, transforming a sleepy regional bank into our firm's biggest client. He picked up on the second ring. "Dana, everything okay with the review deck?" "Not exactly," I said, keeping my voice steady. "They've just eliminated my role. Effective immediately." Silence stretched out, then measured. Why official reason is restructuring, I said. Another pause. Where are you right now in the parking lot? Stay there, Glenn replied. I'm wrapping a meeting nearby. I'll be there in 20. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. Glenn and I had built a business relationship grounded in strategy, transparency, and trust. When he pulled up in his dark blue sedan, 23 minutes later, he motioned toward a coffee shop across the street. Inside, over untouched drinks, Glenn gave me the truth I had already suspected. They've been introducing a new face to our team for weeks. CEO's nephew, Griffin Harding, Wright met him at lunch. He name-dropped 5 executives, but couldn't answer a single question about our compliance needs. I blinked. He mentioned migrating you to the firm's standard reporting platform, didn't he? Glenn nodded. Exactly. I told him your custom reporting system keeps us compliant. He said it was outdated. That system had taken me months to build tailored to Carolina Ridge's multi-jurisdictional requirements. It was one of a dozen customizations I had created to secure and deepen our relationship. Glenn leaned forward. Here's the situation. Our contract renews in 60 days. 3 of your competitors have already contacted us. The only reason we haven't taken their calls is because of you. My heart beat faster. We're expanding next quarter. Bigger footprint, more compliance needs. We're debating whether to double down with your firm or build an internal team. But I've been thinking about a third option. He paused. You, as an independent consultant, at least during the transition. I stared at him. You want me to leave and take your account with me? No, Glenn said. I want to hire the woman who built the only system we trust. Technically, the contract was with my firm, not me. But it was clear who Glenn trusted. And it wasn't Griffin Harding. I thought of my mortgage, my mother's care bills, the humiliating offer from HR. I said I need some time to think. Of course, he said. But don't take too long. 60 days fly by. That evening, I sat on my back porch while Max, my shaggy mutt, chased squirrels across the yard. I sipped red wine and watched the sun dip behind Lake Norman. My phone buzzed. Messages from coworkers, some shocked, others curious. One stood out. Tamar. Our front desk receptionist texted, "They've already moved someone into your office." New nameplate, Griffin Harding. Title says, Senior Client Director. Thought you should know? Senior. He didn't earn that. I poured another glass and stared at the lake. I had 3 options. 1, swallow my pride and take the demotion. 2, walk away with nothing but a resume gap and bruised dignity. Or 3, accept Glenn's offer and start fresh on my own terms. Option 3 felt like crossing a line I'd sworn to never approach. I'd always prided myself on professionalism, on building success through service, not spite. If you're finding strength in stories like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because the next chapter might be the one that helps you reclaim your power too. But that line, it had already been crossed, not by me, but by a company that threw away 2 decades of loyalty like yesterday's memo. Was it truly unethical to serve a client who valued me, even if the logo on my business card changed by morning? I had my answer. I arrived at the office at 6:58 a.m. and sent 1 email short, polite, and direct. I accept the administrative position. I look forward to contributing. Within minutes, HR and my former manager responded with confused replies. They weren't expecting strategy, but I had plenty left, and I wasn't done yet. This wasn't the reaction they expected. HR assumed I'd slam the door on my way out, but instead I showed up the next morning and quietly took my new seat in the administrative support pool near the break room 2 floors below my old office. Whispers followed me. Younger staff peered over cubicles, clearly confused why someone who once led multi-million-dollar client deals was now filing internal supply orders. My new supervisor, a well-meaning woman at least 15 years, my junior, explained everything as if I hadn't been running client strategy 2 weeks prior. I know you probably already know this, but procedure requires I go through it, she said nervously. I smiled and nodded. What she didn't know was this. I didn't come back to keep the job. I came back to watch. Taking the entry-level position gave me physical access to the building and visibility into team operations. I needed to observe how Griffin Harding, our CEO's nephew, was handling the Carolina Ridge account before I made my next move. That afternoon, I called Glenn. I'm in, I told him. I'll accept the consulting role. But for now, I'm staying at the firm officially. That's unusual, he said, caught off guard. Why? To make sure your transition is handled properly. You deserve continuity. Glenn didn't entirely buy it, but he didn't press. When can you start? I can begin. After hours. Quietly. No formal conflict as long as we stay transparent. I respect that, he replied. Sounds like a plan. For 3 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I alphabetized invoices and managed supply inventory with over-the-top professionalism. I greeted everyone, warmly helped where I wasn't expected to, and kept my eyes open. By night, I met with Glenn's team, quietly advising on regulatory infrastructure, drafting a new services roadmap, and documenting the custom compliance framework I'd once built for them off the books. Meanwhile, Griffin did exactly what I predicted. He swept in like he was leading a product launch, not managing a long-standing financial relationship. He moved meetings to his calendar without checking client availability, stripped away customized processes, and repeatedly reassured the team that the new platform will streamline everything. But Carolina Ridge wasn't a typical account. Their structure was complex, their regulations unique. I had spent years building tools tailored to those nuances. Griffin didn't get that, and no one had written any of it down. Soon problems emerged, data mismatches, missed deadlines, reports formatted incorrectly. Griffin dismissed them as growing pains. By week 4, Glenn had enough. He requested an urgent meeting with our company's executive team for the following Monday. His tone was civil but firm. Griffin appeared relaxed. Clients panicked during upgrades, he said at a prep meeting. We'll smooth this out in no time. That Friday afternoon, a new invite hit my inbox. Subject: Carolina Ridge Financial. Service meeting attendees: Dana Whitmore, Griffin, Harding, exec team. Someone finally remembered I still knew how to spell compliance. I spent the weekend preparing not for the meeting, but for what came after. I reviewed the consulting agreement again, checked my non-compete, which applied to competitors, not clients, and finalized the transition plan I had quietly created with Glenn. Monday morning arrived. I wore a navy blazer, professional, understated. When I stepped into the boardroom, conversation stopped. The CEO raised an eyebrow. "Dana?" he said carefully. "I received an invite," I replied, taking a seat. Before anything more could be said, Glenn entered along with Carolina Ridge's general counsel and chief operating officer. The room froze. A routine client meeting had just become high stakes. After introductions, Glenn got to the point. "We're here because service quality has collapsed. Reports are wrong, deadlines missed. And worst of all, nobody seems to understand our compliance framework anymore." Griffin jumped in. "We're in transition. These things happen with change." Glenn looked at him coldly. "Change isn't the issue. Ignorance is." He turned to me. "Dana, would you agree the reporting system was designed specifically for our regulatory needs?" "Yes," I said simply. "It can't be replaced by standard templates." Everyone knew it, but now it was on record. And the reckoning was just beginning. We weren't informed of any planned upgrades to systems that were functioning well. Glenn said, his voice calm but firm. Griffin responded with the confidence of someone quoting a textbook. "Sometimes modernization is necessary, even if things appear adequate." Glenn turned his full attention to him. "Mr. Harding, those systems were already modern. They were built specifically for our compliance structure by someone who actually understood our business." He shifted his gaze to the end of the table toward me. "Isn't that right, Dana?" All eyes turned. I nodded once. The reporting system was updated quarterly. Its architecture was built to flag multi-jurisdictional compliance issues, something the standard platform can't do without major reconfiguration. The CEO's expression tightened. "If you had concerns, they should have gone through proper channels." With all due respect, I replied evenly. "My current role doesn't include oversight of client systems." I wasn't consulted. The room went silent. Glenn took that moment to slide printed binders across the table. "We've completed a detailed evaluation of our service relationship. Based on recent failures, we've concluded the current arrangement no longer fits our needs. The CEO flipped through the pages, color draining from his face. This looks like a major restructuring. Yes, Glenn confirmed. We're unbundling several services. We can handle some of them more effectively in-house or through other providers. What Glenn didn't say out loud, but what was buried in the appendix, was that I'd be the one rebuilding and managing their critical systems as an independent consultant, and at a fraction of the firm's inflated bundle rates. Griffin's hand froze mid-page. This would cut your contract by nearly 40%. Glenn didn't blink. That reflects the value we're actually receiving. The CEO's eyes flicked between Glenn and me, running calculations in real time. Then carefully, maybe we were premature in reallocating Dana's responsibilities. Her institutional knowledge is clearly valuable. We could consider reinstating her to ensure continuity. There it was. The offer I knew would come. Glenn looked toward me, waiting to see if this was the part where I smiled and took back what I'd built. I kept my expression neutral. That's generous. But I believe administration is where the company decided I'm most effective. I wouldn't want to disrupt their plan. The confusion on their faces was exquisite. They weren't ready for grace as resistance. Glenn cleared his throat. We'll move forward with the restructuring. The firm will remain a vendor for now, but only under the revised terms. The meeting wrapped in stiff silence. As executives broke into small, worried huddles, I returned to my desk in admin and got back to reconciling an office supply invoice. By day's end, the internal buzz was loud. Losing 40% of our biggest client's contract had sent the leadership team into a tailspin. The next morning, I was summoned to the CEO's office. I assumed he'd make a formal offer to restore my role, but his tone was different, less conciliatory, more calculated. This situation with Carolina Ridge is unfortunate, he said from behind his massive desk. Griffin may have acted too quickly, but that's fixable. What concerns me is the timing, he continued. Glenn Price specifically asked for you yesterday. He cited systems only you would know. The proposal includes specs that match your past work almost exactly. He leaned forward. Have you been communicating with them outside official channels? I didn't flinch. Glenn reached out after my role changed. We've always had a professional relationship, and the consulting agreement they mention, I'm not aware of the full content of their proposal. As you know, I only have access to admin-level tools. He didn't believe me, but he couldn't prove anything either. My agreement with Glenn was locked and timed perfectly to activate only after the contract changes were finalized. Dana, he said, softening his voice. We've worked together a long time. I've always respected your contribution. So why, I wondered, had I become so disposable? His words came too late, and I wasn't interested in being rescued. Maybe we were too quick with the restructuring, the CEO said, shifting in his seat. Your institutional knowledge is clearly valuable. What would it take to resolve this amicably? There it was, the negotiation I'd anticipated. But the timing caught me off guard. I'd expected them to try salvaging the Carolina Ridge account first, not come to me directly with concessions. I'm not sure what you're asking, I replied evenly, keeping my posture relaxed. He sighed like a man reluctantly letting go of pride. Let's be direct. You built that client relationship. They trust you. We need it to continue. Name your terms. For a split second, I let myself imagine saying yes, a reinstated title, maybe even something loftier. A pay bump, applause, a vindicated return to the office I'd been quietly erased from. But then I remembered Patrice and the general counsel, the way they couldn't even look me in the eye when they cut me loose. I remembered seeing Griffin's nameplate go up on my old door before I'd even cleared my personal belongings. I remembered 2 decades of missed Thanksgivings and answering client calls from ER waiting rooms. I appreciate the conversation, I said, standing. But I should return to my duties. The quarterly supply inventory is due by end of day. He looked stunned. You're turning down your old position. I'm honoring the company's decision, I said. They placed me in the role where my skills are best utilized. I walked out calmly. It wasn't revenge. It was something worse for him to process. Indifference. The next 2 weeks were tense. Carolina Ridge moved forward with the contract revision despite the company's desperate attempts to patch things. Griffin launched internal initiatives to prove the firm's standard system could still serve the client, but every change he made revealed how little he understood the account. I quietly performed my administrative duties. I accepted sudden lunch invitations from old colleagues who suddenly remembered my name. I answered technical questions when asked, but never volunteered. At night, I worked with Glenn and his team to finalize the consulting blueprint. Carolina Ridge would cut their vendor costs by 40% while maintaining the systems I'd originally built. For me, it meant less stress, more income, and control over my own hours. 3 days before the board vote, Griffin approached my desk. The desperation in his voice had replaced the swagger. "I need your help with Carolina Ridge." I glanced up. "How can I assist the reporting system you built? They keep referencing undocumented functions. I need to replicate it before the board meeting Friday." I'd been waiting for this moment. "I'd be happy to walk you through the architecture," I said. "When do you want to meet?" "Now, if possible," he said, hopeful. Conference room 6 is open. For 4 hours, I guided him through the infrastructure. Every custom alert, every compliance flag, every workaround. As we wrapped up, the truth had become painfully clear to him. "You built all this?" "Yes," I replied. Over time, with input from their compliance officers. Griffin ran a hand through his hair, defeated. "And I tore it down in 3 weeks. It was the first time I felt a flicker of sympathy. Griffin wasn't a villain, he was inexperienced. Smart, maybe, but out of his depth. "These systems can be rebuilt," I said gently, with the right understanding. He nodded slowly. "Even if I worked all weekend, there's no way I can fix this before Friday." I didn't confirm. I didn't have to. At the door, he turned. "Why did you help me?" I looked at him honestly. "Because you asked, and because the client comes first." He paused, then nodded and walked out. That Thursday night, my phone buzzed. The CEO was calling. "Carolina Ridge's board meets tomorrow," he said flatly. "Griffin says you've been helpful, but we're still facing a major contract loss." I waited. "We'd like to offer you a restored position, director level, with higher compensation and equity." Tempting. Generous even. "But too late." "I appreciate the offer," I replied. "But I believe your restructuring already decided where I belong." He didn't speak, and I didn't need him to. He didn't bother with a greeting. "Griffin says you've been helpful with the technical details," the CEO said, his voice flat. "But we're still facing a major contract reduction." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "We've prepared a counteroffer," he continued. "We'd like to restore your previous position with a significant raised director-level authority and equity participation." He let that hang before adding, "In exchange, we'd like your active help convincing Carolina Ridge to keep the full service agreement in place." It was more than I expected. The equity alone would have offered financial security I'd never reached even after 20 years of service. "That's very generous," I said. "We value loyalty, Dana. Your knowledge is irreplaceable." I bit back the urge to laugh. "And Griffin?" "He'll remain in a senior role focusing on new business. You'd handle all existing accounts." I let it sit for a moment. It was tempting, everything I'd worked for. Recognition, status, security. All I had to do was help Carolina Ridge continue overpaying for bundled services they no longer needed. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally. "But I don't believe I can influence their decision. Their analysis seems thorough." Silence. Then his tone sharpened. "I see. Well, good luck with your future endeavors." The message beneath it was clear. But it no longer had teeth. The admin role was never my destination. Just a bridge. Friday morning, I submitted my resignation, effective immediately. I packed my few things into a box, walked past the cubicles one last time, and nodded to Tamar at the front desk. "They're all in the executive conference room," she whispered. "Carolina Ridge's board decision is coming through video." I gave her a small smile and stepped into the spring sunlight. For the first time in 2 decades, I had nowhere I needed to be. I drove to a quiet lakeside park, the same one where I had sat 5 weeks earlier after being demoted. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and honeysuckle. I'd removed company email from my phone earlier that morning. At exactly 10:30 a.m., As Carolina Ridge's board met, I sat on a weathered bench overlooking the water and let it all wash over me: anger, grief, freedom. My phone buzzed. Text from Glenn: decision delivered. Call when ready. I gave myself 30 more minutes of silence before dialing. It's official, Glenn said. The board approved the revised agreement: 40% reduction in fees, unbundled services, just like we planned. How did they take it? I asked. Glenn chuckled. Not well. Your CEO made a last-ditch offer to reinstate the custom system, but our tech team told them the knowledge they needed had already left the building. I smiled despite myself, and our consulting arrangement approved unanimously. Start Monday if you're ready. 6-month contract, renewable or convertible to permanent. I'll be ready, I said. What followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in my career. I worked with Carolina Ridge's tech team to rebuild the system this time, with documentation and knowledge transfer built in. The hours were fair. The work was challenging. And for the first time in years, I had a life beyond the office. I joined a community garden, took Max to weekend training classes. I reconnected with family who'd grown used to my silence. 3 months in, Glenn invited me to lunch at a rooftop restaurant overlooking uptown Charlotte. Through the glass, I could see the towers, including my former employer's headquarters. As we ate, Glenn casually dropped the update. Their quarterly report came out yesterday. Revenue down 22%. Stock dropped 30 points. I nodded. Not surprising. What you might find interesting, he added, is that Griffin resigned last week. Heading back to grad school. I raised an eyebrow. Honestly, that's probably a smart move. He has potential, just lacked the experience to lead. Glenn looked at me. You don't seem satisfied. Most people would call this the perfect revenge story. I took a sip of water and looked back out at the skyline. That's the thing, I said. This was never about revenge. The undervalued employee who brought down the company, that discarded her, Glenn, said, half joking. I paused, then shook my head. That wasn't my goal. I didn't destroy them. I just knew my worth when they chose not to. The 40% contract reduction that gutted their quarterly report. It was honest. It was necessary. I would have recommended the same restructuring if I were still employed there, though no one would have listened. That's why the board approved your consulting deal without hesitation, Glenn said. Integrity is rare in this business. As our lunch wound down, Glenn leaned forward. We've been discussing something internally. The board's approved a new full-time role, Director of Regulatory Systems. It would report directly to me with a team of 4 specialists. You're offering me a permanent position, I asked. With compensation nearly double your previous salary, he said, and real work-life balance. We've noticed how much more efficient you've become outside the 80-hour chaos. It was a compelling offer. Everything I'd worked toward for 2 decades, respect, leadership, financial security, wrapped in a role I could shape on my terms. But I hesitated. May I think about it? I asked. The consulting work has offered a kind of freedom I didn't know I needed. Glenn nodded. Of course. The role was built for you. But if you'd rather keep your independence, we understand. That evening, I sat on the back porch watching Max chase fireflies in the yard. The sky above Lake Norman had turned lavender. I reflected on how far I'd come in just a few months. The company that once defined my worth was unraveling in my absence. The consulting role I had built gave me more income flexibility and peace than I'd ever had under their roof. And yet the biggest transformation wasn't about work, it was about perspective. My value had never come from titles or offices or who thought I was indispensable. It came from years of hard-won skill, quiet dedication, and doing what others wouldn't. Those things were mine wherever I went. The revenge fantasy I once entertained now felt empty. The company's decline didn't thrill me. Griffin's resignation stirred sympathy, not satisfaction. Even the CEO's desperate final offer felt more like an apology than justice. What brought peace wasn't revenge. It was building something of my own, slowly, intentionally, and creating boundaries that honored both my work and my life. A week later, I accepted Glenn's offer with modifications: flexible hours, partial remote work, and a commitment to documentation and training so no one else would become a single point of failure like I once was. The day I signed the contract, I drove past my former employer's office tower downtown. Their logo still glowed over the skyline. But rumor had it a buyout was in motion. I didn't feel spite, just a quiet awareness that sometimes what you lose makes room for who you really are. 6 months later, an industry newsletter confirmed it. The company had been acquired. The CEO stepped down. The sale price represented a 50% devaluation from the prior year. A small photo showed movers carrying boxes from the executive floor I once worked on. Glenn forwarded the article to me with a single question mark. I replied simply, every company reveals what it values. Some learn too late that relationships and institutional memory matter more than nepotism and titles. That night, I hosted a dinner party, my first in years. Colleagues from Carolina Ridge laughed beside my neighbors and friends from the community garden. Max trotted between guests, tail wagging. As stories flowed and glasses clinked, I realized something simple but profound. The most powerful way to reclaim your worth isn't by taking someone else down. It's by building a life they can't touch. If you've ever been underestimated, cast aside, or overlooked, remember their blindness doesn't define your value. You do. If this story resonated, hit the like button and subscribe. Every week, we share stories of people who turned setbacks into turning points, because sometimes the most ordinary voices carry the most extraordinary strength.